gentlemen, just a reminder, an attorney's question or statements, that is not evidence. What is evidence is the answer to a question and testimony and exhibits that are admitted as evidence, or any stipulations between the parties. If I sustain an objection, but there's already been an answer, you are to disregard the answer to any sustained objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Monette, did you feel like you were making progress with Mr. Boyd when you were up there for your hour and 10 minutes?
Yeah, I believe there was some progress to it.
Okay. 1 second, Your Honor. I'll pass the witness.
Good morning, Mr. Monette.
Morning.
I want to start by talking to you about your background with the Albuquerque Police Department. You began APD's Training Academy in April of 2009, correct?
Correct.
And you completed the academy in roughly October of 2009, is that correct?
Correct.
And you mentioned on direct that you completed APD's crisis intervention training in September of 2010?
I believe so.
Okay. And so at the time of the March 2014 incident, you were still a CIT officer, correct?
Correct.
And you were assigned to field services?
Correct.
So at the time of that incident, you had experience working as a CIT officer for approximately 4 years, correct?
Correct.
And during that time, as you mentioned on direct, you had been involved in hundreds, I think those were your words, hundreds of crisis situations, correct?
Correct, or dealing with somebody with a mental illness or in crisis.
Okay, and along those lines, during your time as a CIT officer, you would work to de-escalate situations that involved rational-minded individuals, correct?
Correct.
And you also worked to de-escalate situations that involved individuals with mental illness who were in crisis, correct?
That's correct.
And during that time, as a CIT officer, you learn that sometimes you do the best you can and you don't get the result you want. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In other words, you learned that some incidents cannot be de-escalated or resolved using CIT techniques. Is that correct?
Yes, it's possible.
Now, based on your training and experience, your overall goal as a CIT officer is to de-escalate crisis situations, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you de-escalate, and you've been trained to de-escalate crisis situations by building rapport, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you build rapport. One of the ways you can build rapport is by encouraging someone to stop thinking about what is going on and redirecting them to essentially think about something they care about. Is that correct?
Yes, that's possible.
It could be directing their attention to their family, correct?
Yes.
Their pets?
Yes. Anything that they really get any joy out of or enjoy doing.
Okay. And you also try and assure these individuals who are in crisis that the situation can be resolved peacefully. Is
Yes,
that correct?
that's correct.
Now, in addition to redirecting their attention, it's also important to show empathy for someone in crisis, correct?
Yes, that's correct too.
And showing empathy for that individual in crisis can assist you in building rapport.
That's correct.
And based on your experience, once you've been able to establish a good rapport with someone in crisis, it's much easier to convince that person to cooperate with you, correct?
Yes, usually that helps a lot.
And once someone is willing to cooperate with the directives you are giving them, it's possible to de-escalate a situation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But nonetheless, you need to have that cooperation before you can de-escalate the situation, correct?
Yes, that's pretty big right there.
And the individual, though, would need to actually cooperate with the commands you were giving them before you could de-escalate the situation.
Yes.
For example, if there was an individual armed with a weapon, they would need to put that weapon down before the situation could be de-escalated, correct?
Correct.
Now, based on your training and experience, it can be difficult to meaningfully communicate with someone who is experiencing auditory hallucinations, correct?
Yeah, that can be a big issue.
And if you could, give me an example of what an auditory hallucination is.
Basically, hearing something that everybody else isn't hearing, that's basically kind of going on in that individual's own head or own brain.
Okay, so someone could be hearing their own head that someone's threatening to hurt them, correct?
Yes, it's very possible.
Okay, and why is it difficult to communicate with someone who is experiencing auditory hallucinations?
Because it's kind of like, talking to somebody in a crowd or talking to somebody that's already got somebody else talking to them. It's hard for them to concentrate.
So really those auditory hallucinations disrupt their ability to concentrate and communicate with you, correct?
Yes, correct.
And it can be difficult to engage in meaningful communication with someone who is experiencing visual hallucinations, correct?
Yes, it can.
And if you could, give me an example of what a visual hallucination is.
Well, it could be like I said earlier, it could be anything that the individual is seeing that actually isn't there, but they're seeing themselves, that's only going on in their brain, but they see it like it's real.
Okay, so someone could in their own mind see someone attacking them, correct?
Yes.
But that wouldn't actually be reality.
Correct.
That would just be in their own head.
Yes.
Now, based on your training and experience, individuals with mental illness, and particularly paranoid schizophrenics, can also experience delusions of grandeur, correct?
Yes, that's possible.
And if you could, for the jury, please explain what a delusion of grandeur is.
Just pretty much thinking like that they're in control, they're the ones that know everything. Basically that they're not going to listen to anything else, that it's all about them, and that's it.
So when someone has delusions of grandeur, they're basically thinking that everything is about them, correct?
Yep.
They aren't concerned about the people around them.
No, they're only concerned about themselves, basically.
And they aren't concerned about the safety of the people around them, correct?
Correct.
And that's based on your 4 years, at the time of this incident, your 4 years of experience as a CIT officer, correct?
Yes, correct.
Now, when someone is experiencing these delusions of grandeur, it's difficult for you to effectively communicate with them, correct?
Correct.
Because they don't want to listen to you, correct?
Right. They want everything to go the way they want it to go.
Okay. And that makes it hard for you to gain that level of cooperation you need to de-escalate a situation.
Correct.
And now we also talked about the importance of empathy in de-escalating a situation, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree with me that it's difficult to show empathy for someone who's experiencing delusions of grandeur, correct?
Yes, it can be difficult.
It can be difficult because they think they're better than you, correct?
Not as much as that, but just basically that it's hard to, because if they're trying to be in control, if they're the ones trying to be aggressive, it's hard to empathize with that, because the roles should be reversed. So I guess in a way, yes.
Okay, you can't empathize with someone who is trying to control you, correct?
I'm sure you can, but it's very hard.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Now, individuals with mental illness, in addition to the hallucinations and delusions of grandeur, they can also have paranoid tendencies, correct?
Yes.
And what are paranoid tendencies?
Thinking that everybody's out to get them, really worried about everything, looking over their shoulder, just really unsure of their safety.
So once again, much like the visual and auditory hallucinations we talked about, when someone has paranoid delusions, they can believe people are attacking them, correct?
Objection compound, Your Honor.
I'll rephrase, Your Honor. When someone is experiencing paranoid tendencies, they can believe that people are attacking them, correct?
Yes, it's possible.
And that's based on your experience as a CIT officer, correct?
Correct.
And that thought of people around them attacking them is simply a thought within their head, correct?
Correct.
It's not based in reality.
Correct.
Now, as we discussed before, there are situations where you simply cannot de-escalate an individual who is in crisis.
There's times that can happen, yes.
There are times when you can't de-escalate someone who's in crisis, correct?
Yes, it's possible.
And your ability to de-escalate a situation is dependent on the individual's willingness and ability to communicate with you, correct?
Yes, that's a lot to do with that.
And it's also your ability to de-escalate an incident is dependent on their willingness to cooperate with you, correct?
Correct.
To cooperate with the commands you are giving them, correct?
Correct.
Now I'd like to talk to you about officer safety in crisis situations. Now, in any type, based on your training and experience, in any type of crisis intervention situation, officer safety is absolutely paramount, correct?
Yes, it's very important.
In other words, ensuring officer safety is your number one goal in a crisis situation, correct?
Yes, it's basically the number one goal with everything.
And you would never put an officer's life at risk simply to de-escalate a situation, correct?
Correct.
Now, as part of your crisis intervention training, you've been trained to avoid topics that agitate individuals in crisis, correct?
Correct.
And those topics are known as hot button topics, correct?
Yes, they can be called that.
And if you could give the jury an example of what a hot button topic is.
Let's see. Anything that starts to agitate them. So, like, if you tell a subject that wants to be in control that, hey, I'm in control, not you, that can be one that agitates him. That can be one that gets him upset because he's the one that wants to be in control. So it's anything that will agitate him, make him more angry, just by mentioning one word or phrase or subject that they don't agree with or like.
Okay, so if you have an armed suspect and you tell them to put down whatever weapon they have and they get mad, that's a hot button topic, correct?
Yes, it can be.
That's something that could continually agitate them,
Yes.
correct? And based on your training, you don't continually bring up these hot button topics because that makes the situation worse, correct?
Correct.
And that can endanger you as an officer, correct?
Correct.
It can endanger your fellow officers, correct?
Correct.
And it could endanger the public, correct?
Yes, correct.
Now, Ms. McGinn on her direct talked to you briefly about your training regarding distance in a situation where someone's armed, correct?
Yes.
Have you been trained on the tool or drill?
Yes, I have.
And, well, if you would, just please explain what the tool or drill is.
Basically, what it is, it's like a 21-foot rule, basically where they teach you in the academy that to be able to react to an act of aggression from a suspect, you need to have a minimum of 21 feet. Basically, at the time, I had kind of brought mine out to 30, even though being taught 21 in the academy, and I think the rest of the nation is kind of moving towards 30 also on that right now.
Okay, so you were taught in the academy that a knife is a deadly weapon within 21 feet, correct?
Objection misleading on the tool or drill, Your Honor. Let me rephrase it.
Based on your training in APD's academy, a suspect who is armed with a knife can cover 21 feet and stab you before you can shoot that suspect, correct?
Objection, same objection, Your Honor. I think it's misrepresenting the tool or drill. Okay, let him answer the question. It depends where the gun is, Your Honor.
Is that how you were trained?
Yes, if the subject is armed with a knife, it's very possible that you can get great bodily harm or death within 21 feet.
And since then, as you mentioned, so you were trained in the academy that was 21 feet, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And since then, you have learned that it was actually extended to 30 feet, correct?
Yes.
Now, as you testified, well, second to officer safety, the primary goal of crisis intervention is to de-escalate, correct?
Yes, correct.
And when an individual in crisis is armed with a weapon, the most important aspect of that de-escalation would be convincing that individual to disarm or put down their weapon, correct?
Yes, that'd be a big part.
Now, as you testified before, hot-button topics, such as putting down a weapon, must be avoided because they could put officers at risk. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And now if an individual became agitated every time you spoke with them about their weapon, that would be considered a hot-button topic, correct?
Correct.
And as a CIT officer, you would want to avoid talking to that individual about putting down their weapon because that would escalate the situation, correct?
Correct. Other than the fact that he has a weapon is something that has to do with officer safety also. So even though it is a hot topic, it's still something you would have to bring up to de-escalate the situation anyways.
Okay, so you would have to bring up that weapon, which is a hot-button topic, to de-escalate, correct?
Correct.
But bringing up that weapon would actually escalate by causing them to become agitated, correct?
Correct, it could.
So in that situation, as a CIT officer, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, correct?
Correct, yes.
You need to de-escalate the situation. In doing so, you need to have them drop their weapon, correct?
Correct.
But asking them to drop their weapon causes them to get madder and madder, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's the rock and the hard place, correct?
Yes, I agree with that.
Now I'd like to talk to you about the meaning of words. Now based on your training and experience, it is common for you as a CIT officer in the field to be placed in situations where you know very little about the intentions of an individual who is in crisis. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And in order to gather information, you have to rely on words and actions of the individual who is in crisis, correct?
Yes.
And based on your training, words can be very meaningful, correct?
They can help, yes.
Words can give you insight into the thoughts someone is having,
Yes.
and those are the words spoken by the individual in crisis, correct?
Yes.
And words can also offer you insight into the feelings someone is experiencing.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And words spoken by someone in crisis can offer you insight into what their intentions are. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, fortunately, in addition to the words that are spoken by someone, you can also rely on someone's actions to provide you with information about what that individual's intentions are, correct?
Yes, you can use that.
Much like words, actions can provide you with insight into an individual's thoughts, correct?
Yes, correct.
Actions can provide you with information regarding an individual's feelings, correct?
Yes, correct.
And much like words, actions can provide you with insight into what someone's intentions are, correct?
Yes, it can.
Now, in addition, based on your training and experience, you have the words someone's spoken and their actions, and then you also have their personal history, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's something that you can access as an officer, correct?
Yes, it is.
If given time, you can access that information,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. If you got the time and the resources, and you can.
And that information regarding someone's personal history can also provide you with information as to what someone's intentions are, correct?
Yeah, I can give a baseline.
It can give you a baseline of what someone's capable of, correct?
Yes, correct.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about the training and experience you have in assessing the threat that is posed by an individual with mental illness. When someone is not suffering from mental illness and they are in touch with reality, you can use your training and experience to try and predict what that person is going to do, correct?
Yeah, it's possible.
Because that individual's thinking in a rational thought process, correct?
Yes, correct.
And that's approximately the same rational thought process you're going through, correct?
Yes.
So you can bring those together to try and predict what that individual is going to do, correct?
Yes, you can use that.
Now, when someone is suffering from mental illness and no longer in touch with reality, it makes it very difficult to predict what that individual is going to do, correct?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And it's difficult because they could be experiencing auditory hallucinations, correct?
Correct.
There could be things in their head telling them things
Right.
that aren't necessarily rational, correct?
Correct.
And although they aren't rational, they could still act on those, correct?
Yes, they could.
And they could also be experiencing visual hallucinations, correct?
Correct.
And those visual hallucinations can also make it very difficult to predict what someone with mental illness is going to do, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And when you, as an officer, are stuck in a situation where you cannot predict what someone's going to do, you are left simply reacting to what they do, correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And that is dangerous for an officer, correct?
Yes, the more unpredictable the situation is, it does make it a lot more dangerous for an officer.
And in short, you've been trained that because mentally ill individuals are unpredictable, they pose more of a risk to you as an officer than someone who is not burdened with a mental illness.
I would agree with that.
Now, Your Honor, I'm going to go into the incident. I don't know if you want to take a break at noon or I can keep going.
It's a good time to break. We should get the jury lunch.
Okay.
I'm going to ask that you return at 1 o'clock to the first floor jury assembly room, have a pleasant lunch, and be staying for the jury.